When two identical women from across the sea walked into Copper Hollow's bloodiest saloon on an October night in 1879, the most feared outlaw in the Arizona Territory made the final mistake of his life. He laughed at them. Within 48 hours, 24 armed killers would lie broken in the red dust of the canyon floor. A 15-year hunt would reach its bloody end, and the frontier would gain a new legend, one whispered in trembling voices around every campfire from Tucson to Cheyenne. This is the story of the Zhao sisters and the tyrant who never saw his reckoning coming. If you want to see how two silent strangers brought a reckoning to the lawless West, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The wind that rolled down from the copper-colored bluffs that October evening carried more than grit and the cold breath of a desert night. It carried fear thick, suffocating, settled over the crooked buildings of Copper, hollow like a burial shroud that no man dared lift. The town squatted in a hollow between two walls of oxidized stone, a collection of weathered plank and stubborn hope, where decent folk had long since learned the art of keeping their heads bowed and their mouths stitched shut. Caleb Thorne owned Copper Hollow the way a drunkard owns a mule, with casual cruelty and the absolute certainty that it would never turn on him. The Iron Spur Saloon stood at the heart of town, its smoke-yellowed windows glowing against the deepening dark like the eyes of something patient and hungry. Inside, the air hung heavy with cheap tobacco, cheaper whiskey, and the particular kind of tension that settles on a room when violent men grow bored. 24 of Thorne's riders filled the tables and lined the bar, their weapons displayed with the carelessness of men who had never in their short and vicious lives faced a real consequence. At the largest table in the back, Caleb Thorne held court like a king of broken things. He was a big man running to fat now, in his middle years, but dangerous still, the way a wounded bear is dangerous, slow perhaps, but mean enough to compensate for it. His face carried the roadmap of a violent life, a nose broken 3 times and never properly set a scar that pulled his left eye into a permanent squint, knuckles healed crooked from beatings given and beatings taken. "Another round," Thorne bellowed, slamming a meaty fist on the table hard enough to make the glasses dance. "And this time, Pellman, don't you water down my whiskey or I'll water down your blood." The barkeep, a thin gray man named Pellman, whose hands had developed a permanent tremor, hurried to comply. 3 months ago, he had owned the Iron Spur. Now he worked in it, pouring drinks for the men who had taken everything from him. That was how business was done in Copper Hollow. Thorne's gang didn't simply rob a man, they moved in, made themselves at home, and expected the victim to smile about it. "Boss?" One of the younger riders spoke up, a kid barely out of his teens with quick hands and dead eyes. "Old man Xiao's daughter's out front again. Says her father needs the medicine." Thorne didn't look up from his cards. "Tell her the price ain't changed. $100 for the laudanum or she works it off upstairs. She knows her choices." The kid hesitated half a heartbeat, then slipped out. Thorne studied his cards, decided he didn't care for them, and flung them across the table with a grunt of disgust. "Granger, you're dealing off the bottom again." The man across from him froze. Silas Granger's was newer to the crew, only 6 months in, but he had proven himself useful in the specific ways Caleb Thorne appreciated. He had no conscience worth speaking of, and a pair of steady hands for the sort of work that turned other men's stomachs. He was lean, sharp-featured, with eyes that never quite met another man's straight on. "I ain't cheating, boss," Silas said carefully. "Cards just fell my way. You calling me unlucky?" The saloon quieted. This was how it always began. Thorne working himself up to violence over some imagined slight, the smart play being to back down, apologize, maybe take a small beating and live through it. Silas chose the smart play. "No offense meant, Mr. Thorne. I'll shuffle fresh if you want." Thorne stared at him a long moment, the permanent squint making his expression unreadable. Then he laughed, a booming shotgun blast of a sound that rolled through the saloon. "That's what I like about you, Granger. You know when to bend." He turned to the room. "That's how a man survives in this world, boys. Knows when to bend and when to break things." The tension eased. Men returned to their drinks. The piano player in the corner, who had frozen mid-note, resumed a crooked rendition of "O Shenandoah." A rider at the bar laughed too loud at a joke nobody had made. It was precisely 7:45 when the doors of the Iron Spur swung open, and the desert wind came in, first carrying dust and the bitter perfume of sagebrush. Then came the women, and the entire saloon fell silent in a way that had nothing to do with Caleb Thorne's temper. They were identical, mid-20s perhaps, though their faces held that still composed quality that made age difficult to pin. Both were Chinese, both wore silk, one deep crimson, the color of arterial blood, the other a blue so dark it drank the lamplight. Their black hair was drawn back in matching styles, revealing faces of a striking and almost unsettling beauty. High cheekbones, dark eyes that reflected the lamps like polished obsidian mouths, set in expressions of perfect unearthly calm. But it wasn't their appearance that froze every conversation mid-word. It was the way they moved. They walked into the iron spur with the controlled grace of dancers or gunfighters. Their eyes swept the room with an assessment that felt almost clinical, the way a butcher might look at hanging meat. They showed no fear, no uncertainty, no reaction at all to the 24 armed men turning toward them. They simply crossed to an empty table near the center of the room and sat down. The silence stretched. A chair creaked. The piano player's hands hovered above the keys and would not descend. Somewhere in the back, a man cleared his throat and then seemed embarrassed by the sound. Thorne was the first to recover. He leaned back in his chair, the wood groaning beneath his bulk, and studied the newcomers with the expression of a man who had just discovered an unexpected amusement. "Well now," he said, his voice carrying easily in the stillness, "looks like we got ourselves some exotic entertainment tonight, boys." A few nervous laughs skittered through the room and died. "You ladies lost, 'cause this ain't exactly the kind of establishment that caters to refined tastes." The woman in crimson, the one who had taken the seat with her back to the wall, Thorne noticed with the part of his mind that still registered such things, turned her gaze to him. She did not speak. She did not change expression. She simply looked at him with eyes that were utterly perfectly calm. And that look bothered Thorne in a way he could not have put into words. "I'm talking to you, he said, his voice hardening. "It's polite to answer when a man addresses you." Still nothing. Both women sat perfectly still, hands folded on the tabletop, their breathing so controlled it seemed barely present. One of Thorne's men, a brute named Bull Morgan, who stood 6.5 feet tall and took pleasure in hurting smaller things, pushed back from the bar and swaggered toward the women's table. "Boss is talking to you China dolls." Bull leaned down to loom over them, and up close his breath would have smelled of rot gut and rotted teeth. "You deaf or just stupid?" The woman in dark blue spoke then. Her voice was quiet, but it carried perfectly, in the silent room, her English flawless, save for a faint musical lift that danced around the edges of certain birds. "We heard him." "Then why ain't you answering us proper?" Bull reached out to grab her arm. He never completed the motion. Faster than most eyes could follow, the woman in blue moved. Her hand came up not in a defensive block, but in a precise three-part strike that connected with specific points along Bull's extended arm. There was a sound like green wood snapping, and suddenly Bull Morgan was on his knees, his face the color of tallow, his arm hanging at an angle that made grown men look away. She had not even risen from her chair. She had barely moved at all. Now she sat exactly as before, hands folded, face calm, as if nothing had occurred. Bull tried to stand. His good hand reached for the pistol at his hip. The woman in crimson finally moved, then her foot sweeping out in a short, controlled arc that caught Bull in the solar plexus. The big man collapsed forward, gasping like a landed trout. The saloon erupted. Men sprang from their chairs, boots scraping pistols, clearing leather all around the room. 24 barrels leveled on the two women who sat calmly at their table, seemingly unconcerned that they were a heartbeat from being turned into red ruin. "Hold!" Thorne's voice cracked like a bullwhip. The gun stayed up. Nobody fired. Thorne rose slowly, his eyes never leaving the women. That quiet animal part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive through 15 years of frontier butchery, was screaming at him now, telling him that something was very wrong within his picture. These were not saloon girls. These were not settlers' wives or merchants' daughters. The way they had moved, that speed, that precision, came from training. Serious training. The kind that took years and turned a person into something other than human. "Who are you?" Thorne asked. And this time there was no mockery left in his voice. The woman in crimson spoke for the first time. Her voice was identical to her sister's, quiet, controlled, and absolutely certain. We are looking for someone. In your saloon. In your gang. Thorne's eyes narrowed. That's so, and who might that be? The woman in blue swept her gaze across the room, that same clinical assessment studying faces. When her eyes landed on Silas Granger, they stopped. Held him. Him, she said. Every head in the room turned. Silas Granger had gone the color of whitewash. Me, Silas's voice came out higher than intended. I don't know these women, never seen them in my life. You knew our parents, the woman in crimson said. Her voice remained quiet, but something in it made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. 15 years ago, Fuzhou province, you were working for a man named Phineas Wadsworth. Silas's face went from the color of whitewash to something closer to grave dust. His hand drifted toward his gun, then stopped, thinking better of it, with 24 weapons already drawn. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but the words came out wooden, unconvincing. Our father was Dr. Li Wenhao, the woman in blue continued, a physician and a scholar. Our mother was Su Jinhua. They owned a modest house at the edge of the city with a garden where our mother grew medicinal herbs and white jasmine by the gate. The woman in crimson picked up the thread without pause, as if they were reading from the same invisible script. Your employer wanted something our father possessed, an ancient medical journal written in the hand of a Song Dynasty court physician. Priceless. When our father refused to sell it, Wadsworth decided to take it. You came at night, the woman in blue said. 4 men, you, Wadsworth, 2 others whose names we learned later, Jonas Beckwith and Elias Hargrove. You barred the doors from outside. Set fire to the house, the woman in crimson continued, waited in the alley to make sure no one came out. But someone did. They spoke the words together in perfect unison, and for the first time something flickered across their calm faces, not rage, but something older and harder than rage, something that had been carried so long it had crystallized into its own element. The saloon was so quiet now that the sound of Bull Morgan's labored breathing seemed loud as distant thunder. Thorne looked from the women to Silas and back again, his mind calculating at speeds the rest of his body could no longer match. He did not give the slightest damn about some Chinese doctor murdered halfway around the world, but he did care about threats to his gang, and these 2 women radiated threat the way a forge radiated heat. That's a hell of a story, Thorne said carefully. Even if it's true, and I ain't not saying it is, what makes you think you can walk into my saloon and start making accusations against one of my men? We're not making accusations, the woman in crimson said. We are stating facts. We watched our parents die, the woman in blue added. We were 8 years old, trapped in a root cellar beneath the kitchen floor. We could hear him screaming. We could hear our mother calling our father's name until she couldn't anymore. We survived, the woman in crimson said. When the fire burned itself out, we crawled from the ashes. We buried what was left of our parents beneath the white jasmine by the gate, and then we did something our father had always forbidden. We sought out his teacher's teacher, the woman in blue said, a man known only as Master Wu Jianping, a wanderer, a warrior from the old ways. We trained for 10 years. Learned things our father had called barbaric, the woman in crimson said. Weapons, combat, the art of ending lives efficiently. We became what our parents would have hated because we made a promise to their ghosts. We would find every man who was there that night. We would make them answer. Silas's hand was definitely on his pistol now, though he hadn't drawn. Sweat beaded along his hairline despite the cool evening air. This is crazy, he said, looking to Thorne for support. These women are crazy. I never been to China, never worked for no Wadsworth. They got the wrong man. You have a scar, the woman in crimson said. Left forearm, shaped like a crescent moon. You got it when you were 12 years old, falling through a window in St. Louis. Silas's face went from gray to a shade closer to green. You were born in Missouri, the woman in blue continued, orphaned at 10 when your mother died of cholera. Ran with street gangs until you were 16, then came west. You have worked as a ranch hand, a frayed guard, a claim jumper, and a hired gun. You have killed 9 men in gunfights and at least 7 more in ambushes. And in 1864, the woman in crimson said, when you were 20 years old, you sailed with Phineas Wadsworth to Fuzhou province. You helped him acquire rare books and antiquities through whatever means he deemed necessary. There was a song you liked to sing under your breath when you worked, An old riverboat tune. You were humming it when you barred the cellar door. The detail, the precision, it was crushing. Silas Granger looked like a man watching his own hanging unfold in slow motion. Thorne had heard enough. He didn't like mysteries, and he especially didn't like threats to his authority. These women had walked into his saloon, crippled one of his men, and now they were making claims that had Silas looking ready to bolt into the desert. Here's what's going to happen, Thorne said, his voice flattening into the matter-of-fact tone he used right before he killed a man. You ladies are going to stand up, walk out that door, and keep walking until you're out of my town. If I see you again, my boys are going to put so much lead in you, you'll rattle when you fall. The women didn't move. I don't think you heard me, Thorne said. We heard you, the woman in crimson said. Then why ain't you walking? Because we have unfinished business with Silas Granger, the woman in blue said. When that business is concluded, we'll leave, not before. Thorne's patience, never his strongest quality, snapped. Boys, escort these ladies out. Gentle if they cooperate, not so gentle if they don't. 4 men peeled away from their positions, hands on their weapons, but not quite drawing. They were tough men used to violence, but something about the unnatural stillness of the 2 women at the center table made them approach with the caution of dogs circling something strange. The woman in crimson spoke again, and this time her voice carried a quality that made every man in the room suddenly remember the ghost stories their grandmothers had whispered by winter firesides. We are Mei-Lin and Xiu-Lan Zhao. Perhaps you've heard of us by other names. In Sacramento, they call us the Silk Shadows. In Denver, the Red Death. In Tombstone, she paused, they call us the Twin Phoenix. The effect was immediate and electric. 2 of the 4 advancing men stopped in their tracks. Another took a half step backward before he caught himself. Throughout the saloon, the sound of pistol hammers being thumbed fully back filled the air like a single long breath. Even Caleb Thorne felt something cold trace a finger down his spine. The Twin Phoenix. He had heard the stories, dismiss most of them as frontier tall tales. 2 Chinese women who moved like smoke and fought like devils and left a trail of broken men across 3 territories. A claim-jumping crew ended in Nevada. A gang of 7 taken apart in Colorado. A corrupt marshal gunned down in his own courthouse in Arizona. Thorne had always figured it was exaggeration, the kind of legend that grew in the retelling, picking up teeth and claws with every drunk who passed it along. Looking at these 2 women now, seeing the absolute certainty in their eyes, he was no longer so sure. Prove it, he said. The woman who had named herself Mei-Lin, the one in crimson, smiled then. It was not a pleasant expression. It was the smile of something very old remembering a grievance. We killed Phineas Wadsworth, she said. Found him in San Francisco living under the name Thomas Whitfield. He died slowly. We found Jonas Beckwith in a mining camp outside Leadville, Xiu-Lan added. He tried to run. It didn't help him. And we found Elias Hargrove in Cheyenne, Mei-Lin said. He begged. That didn't help him either. Silas Granger is the last. The last man who murdered our parents, Xiu-Lan finished. The last piece of unfinished business. Then we will finally be free, Mei-Lin said quietly. The silence that followed was profound. In that moment, every man in the Iron Spur understood in his bones that he was witnessing something rare and terrible. The final chapter of a vengeance that had burned for 15 years and traveled halfway around the world to arrive at this saloon on this night in this town. Silas broke first. His hand flashed toward his gun with the speed of a man who had survived more than one gunfight. He was genuinely fast. He didn't stand a chance. Both women moved simultaneously. Mei-Lin's hand swept out in a motion too quick to fully register, and something small and silver flashed through the air. It caught Silas's gun hand and pinned it to the table with a throwing knife that seemed to have materialized from nowhere. Silas screamed more from shock than from pain, though the pain would come. Xiu-Lan was already standing, though no one had seen her rise. She moved around the table with fluid grace, drawing a revolver from somewhere within the folds of her dark blue silk. The pistol looked almost delicate in her hands, silver-plated with grips of inlaid pearl, but the barrel was steady as a carved stone, and it was pointed directly at Silas Granger's forehead. Not yet, Mei-Lin said, still seated, still calm. We did not come all this way to make it quick. Thorne had seen enough. These women were dangerous, probably more dangerous than anyone he had ever faced. But he had 24 men with guns in this room. Numbers had to count for something. Numbers had to mean something. Kill them, he ordered. What followed would be spoken of in Copper Hollow for 3 generations, told in low voices in the back rooms of saloons and whispered to wide-eyed children at bedtime. The guns came up all around the room. 2 dozen pistols trained on 2 women in silk. And in that frozen instant before the triggers were pulled, Mei-Lin and Xiu-Lan Zhao looked at each other across the crowded saloon, and something passed between them. Some silent communication forged over 15 years and 10,000 miles. And then they moved. Xiu-Lan's silver pistol barked twice in rapid succession. 2 lanterns hanging from the ceiling beams exploded, showering the room with glass and burning oil, plunging half the iron spur into sudden, pitching shadow. In the chaos of shattered glass and spilling flame, both women seemed to simply vanish. Gunfire erupted. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like summer lightning. Men fired at where the women had been, at shadows at each other. The air filled with blue smoke and the thunder of pistols, and the high screaming of men who were only beginning to understand that they had been outmaneuvered before the first shot was fired. Mei-Lin appeared behind the bar as if she had condensed out of the smoke itself. Her hands moved in a blur, and 3 of Thorne's men collapsed, clutching wounds that would take them out of the fight, but would not kill them. Not yet. Not tonight. She vaulted over the bar, crimson silk streaming behind her like a banner of blood, and disappeared into the chaos. Xiu-Lan moved through the confusion the way water moves around stones. A gun barrel appeared beside a man's ear. She twisted it away without seeming to look, using his own momentum to send him crashing into his companion. Both went down hard. A rider grabbed at a flash of blue silk. She spun her elbow, connecting with his jaw in a strike that sounded like an axe biting into dry wood. He dropped like a cut puppet. "Spread out!" Thorne bellowed from the center of the room. "Watch your sectors! Don't bunch up, you idiots!" His men tried to comply, but they were saloon fighters and back shooters, not soldiers. They bunched up anyway, seeking the cold comfort of numbers, making themselves into perfect targets. Mei-Lin dropped from the upper balcony. When had she gotten up there, landing in a controlled roll that brought her up behind 4 men clustered near the piano? Quick strikes to kidneys, to the backs of knees, to the side of a neck. All 4 went down like puppets, whose strings had been cut with a single blade. A young gunman with good instincts and better reflexes spotted her movement and swung his pistol around fast. Very fast. Xiu-Lan's second throwing knife caught him in the shoulder, spinning him in place, not a killing blow, but enough to take him out of the fight. "No killing!" Mei-Lin's quiet voice called out across the chaos, somehow cutting through the gunfire. "Not yet. Not until we have answers." The fight lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was over, 20 men lay groaning across the floor of the Iron Spur Saloon, clutching various injuries. None were dead, though several had lost enough blood to regret being born. Only 4 men were still standing. Caleb Thorne, Silas Granger, still pinned to the table by a silver throwing knife, and 2 of Thorne's more cautious lieutenants who had backed into a corner and decided that discretion was very much the better part of valor. Mei-Lin and Xiu-Lan Zhao stood at the center of the room, not even breathing hard. Their silk dresses were torn at the hems and speckled with dust, but their expressions were as calm as when they had walked through the door 10 minutes before. "We told you," Xiu-Lan said into the silence. "We have business with Silas Granger. That business does not concern the rest of you." Thorne's face had gone a deep apoplectic purple. He had built his reputation on being the meanest, most dangerous man in 3 territories. He had killed his first man at 15, built his gang through pure brutality, taken this town through fear and broken bones. And 2 women, 2 goddamn women in silk dresses, had just carved through his gang like a cleaver through soft cheese. "This ain't it over," he snarled. "It is for tonight," Mei-Lin said. She looked at Silas, still pinned to the table, openly weeping now. "Tomorrow morning, 1 hour after dawn, we'll meet you outside of town. Bring Silas Granger. Bring your whole gang if you want, but this debt will be paid. And if you don't bring him," Xiu-Lan said, "then we'll come for him, and next time we won't be so careful about avoiding fatal wounds." With that, both women turned and walked toward the door. Every conscious man in the saloon tracked them with weapons, but no one fired. The demonstration had been too complete, too devastating. They had just learned the hard way what these women could do when they were trying not to kill. Nobody in the Iron Spur wanted to see what happened when they stopped being merciful. The door swung closed behind the twins, and the desert winds swept through the saloon once more, carrying away the blue gun smoke and leaving behind only shocked silence and the low, wet groans of broken men. Thorne stared at the closed doors for a long moment. Then he turned slowly to look at Silas Granger still frozen at the table, with a silver blade pinning his hand to the wood. "Looks like you got some explaining to do, son," Thorne said, and his voice when it came was very quiet and very cold, and carried the unmistakable promise that whatever happened at dawn, Silas Granger's long run from his past was finally over. Outside, under a sky already thick with desert stars, Mei-Lin and Xiu-Lan Zhao walked down the dark, dust-choked length of Copper Hollow's main street. The October wind pulled at their damaged silk. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Xiu-Lan broke the silence. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," Mei-Lin agreed. 15 years. "And tomorrow it ends." They walked on through the darkness, two silent figures moving through a town that was only beginning to understand it had become the stage for the final act of a vengeance that had crossed an ocean to find it. Behind them, in the lamplit ruin of the Iron Spur, Caleb Thorne was pulling a silver knife from Silas Granger's hand with one sharp, merciless yank, and the night for Copper Hollow had only just begun. In a second-story room at Hannah Whitlock's boarding house on 4th Street, Mei-Lin and Xiu-Lan Zhao sat cross-legged on the plank floor, cleaning and checking their weapons by the flickering light of a single tallow candle. Their movements were identical, synchronized the way they had been since childhood, two hands of the same silent musician working the same silent instrument. "Sister," Xiu-Lan said quietly, "when it's over, when he's dead, what then?" Mei-Lin did not answer at once. She had asked herself that question 1,000 times over the long years, turning it over in the dark of countless rented rooms. They had defined themselves by this hunt, shaped their entire adult lives around it. When the last name was crossed off the list, who would they even be? "I don't know," she admitted at last. "Maybe," Xiu-Lan said carefully, "maybe we'll finally be able to stop being weapons." Maybe, Mei-Lin agreed, but neither of them sounded convinced. They finished their preparations in silence. Two sisters bound by blood and grief and a promise made to the ghosts of a burned garden half a world away. Tomorrow would bring answers one way or another. Tomorrow would bring an end to the longest hunt of their lives. Tomorrow would bring death or something stranger to Copper Hollow. The October wind howled through the copper bluffs above the town, carrying whispers of the violence to come. The candle had burned halfway down by the time Mei-Lin spoke again. "Do you remember the garden?" she asked, her hands still moving methodically over the cylinder of her revolver, testing the action, checking each chamber. Xiu-Lan paused in her own work, a small, balanced throwing knife resting across her palm like a compass needle. "Every day," she said, "the white jasmine by the gate. Mother's herb beds in their neat, straight rows. Father used to say she had a physician's hands for organizing things. He would sit on the stone steps after his rounds smoking that long bamboo pipe, telling us stories about the old emperors. We thought those stories were boring then." Mei-Lin's voice carried the weight of memory. "We were children. We wanted adventure tales, sword fights, heroes, villains." "We got our adventure," Xiu-Lan said bitterly. "We got our sword fights." A long silence settled between them, broken only by the muffled sound of men shouting somewhere in the street below, Thorne's gang regrouping, arguing, perhaps drinking themselves into courage. The sisters ignored it. They had faced worse odds before. "Master Wu used to say that vengeance was a poison we drank while hoping the other person would die," Xiu-Lan said. She set down her knife and looked at her sister across the candle flame. "Do you think he was right?" "I think he trained us anyway," Mei-Lin replied, "even knowing what we intended to do with Huid teachings, even knowing it would change us into something our parents would not have recognized. Maybe he understood that some poisons have to run their course before the body can heal." She loaded fresh rounds into the cylinder of her pistol, each brass cartridge sliding home with a soft final click. "Tomorrow we find out if 15 years of poison were worth it." Across town in the back room of the Iron Spur Saloon, Caleb Thorne was having similar thoughts about poison, though his centered more on the kind that came in amber bottles. He had sent most of his walking wounded off to get patched and sobered, keeping only his core, the 5 men he trusted most, which in Thorne's world meant the 5 most predictable in their violence and most loyal to their pay. Silas Granger sat in a chair at the center of the room, his wounded hand wrapped in a whiskey-soaked strip of cloth. The bleeding had mostly stopped, but his face still held the gray pallor of a man watching his own funeral approach on a timetable he could not alter. "Tell it again," Thorne ordered, "from the beginning. And this time, Granger, don't leave nothing out." Silas swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing above his filthy collar. "It was 1864, he began. I was working the San Francisco docks, loading freight, taking whatever work I could find. A man named Phineas Wadsworth approached me one afternoon. Said he needed strong backs for a job overseas. Pay was good, real good, enough to set a man up for a few years if he was careful with it. So you went to China." "We went. Me, Wadsworth, and two others, Beckwith and Hargrove. Wadsworth had connections with the merchant ships running out of the bay. We traveled as crew, worked our passage, arrived in Fuzhou province after 3 months at sea." Thorne poured himself another drink, his fourth since the women had left, or his fifth. He had lost count. "What was the job?" "Wadsworth was a collector, books, manuscripts, old artifacts. He sold to rich men back east, men who wanted exotic pieces for their libraries and their parlors. Most of what he did was legal, buying from dealers, negotiating with scholars. But sometimes there were pieces that weren't for sale. This medical journal was one of those." "Go on." "Wadsworth had heard about it through his contacts. An ancient text on medicine and herbalism. Supposedly 1,000 years old, written in the hand of a court physician during the Song dynasty. The kind of thing museums back east would pay a fortune to own." Silas winced as the movement of his jaw pulled at some deeper hurt. "Wadsworth tried buying it first, I'll give him that. He approached the owner, Dr. Lee, and offered what he thought was a generous price. But the doctor refused. Said the journal had been passed down through his teacher's lineage for 9 generations. It wasn't about money, it was about honor. So Wadsworth decided to take it. We watched the house for a week, learned the patterns. Lee lived there with his wife and 2 small daughters, twins. They were maybe 7 or 8, always playing together in the garden. Get to the part where you burned them alive, Granger." "It wasn't supposed to happen that way," Silas said, his voice rising defensively. "Wadsworth's plan was to break in while they slept, take the journal, leave quick and quiet. But when we got inside, Dr. Lee was awake. He heard us moving. He came out of his bedroom with an old sword family heirloom, I think, yelling, trying to protect his wife and daughters. Beckwith panicked and hit him. Hit him hard. Dr. Lee went down and didn't get up." Silas paused, lost in the memory. When he continued, his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Then his wife started screaming. The noise, the case, we'd lost control. Wadsworth was furious. He said we couldn't leave witnesses. Said if the authorities got involved, we'd never make it back to the ships alive. "So you barred the doors?" "Hargrove did that part. I swear to—" Silas stopped, apparently realizing how hollow the protest sounded. "Wadsworth found the journal in Lee's study, leather binding wrapped in silk. We took it and ran. By the time we were a street away, we could see the flames climbing the sky behind us." Thorne studied the man in front of him with the cold assessment of someone who had committed his own share of sins and knew the shape of a lie. "You know what I think, Granger? Think you're lying. Maybe not about the whole thing, but about your part in it. You want me to believe you were just along for the ride, just caught up in things bigger than you, but a man doesn't run for 15 years from something he wasn't guilty of." Silas said nothing. "Those women," Thorne continued, "they said they were in a root cellar. Said they heard their parents screaming. That means someone, maybe you, maybe one of the others, made sure to bar the cellar door from above to make certain no one crawled out. Only whoever did it didn't check carefully enough. Didn't know there was another way out." "It was a long time ago," Silas said weakly. "Not long enough, seems like." Thorne leaned back in his chair. "Here's what I can't figure, though. You've been running for 15 years. Staying ahead of those women all that time. Why stop in Copper Hollow? Why take a chance settling anywhere even for 6 months? I thought I was safe. The others were all dead. Wadsworth, Beckwith, Hargrove, all of them. I figured whoever was hunting us had finished her work. I figured it was over." "You figured wrong." A knock at the door interrupted them. Ezra Cade Thorne's lean, scar-faced lieutenant poked his head in. "Boss, we got a situation." "What now?" Them Chinese women, they're staying at Hannah Whitlock's place over on 4th. Some of the boys are talking about paying them a visit tonight. Finish this before morning, while they're sleeping. Thorne considered it. A night attack. Catching them while they were vulnerable. It was the smart tactical play, hit your enemy when they weren't expecting it. Except these women had walked into a saloon full of 24 armed killers and dismantled them in minutes. They had done it in the lamplight, in full view, without a single visible concern for the odds. What would they be like when they were expecting an attack? No, Thorne said finally. We do this in the open, tomorrow morning, like they said. Cade looked surprised. Boss, that's playing by their rules. Their rules put 20 of our men on the floor tonight without killing a single one. They could have killed every man in that saloon if they'd wanted to. They were making a point. What point? That they're better than us and they want us scared when we face them tomorrow. Thorne's voice was grim. So what we do is we make sure we've got every advantage we can get. Get the men together, everyone who can still hold a gun. I want sharpshooters on the rooftops, men positioned behind cover. I want a killing ground set up where we control every angle. You really think they'll show? Oh, they'll show. This is what they came for. They'll walk into whatever trap we set and they'll do it knowing full well it's a trap, because they believe they're good enough to walk out the other side of it. Thorne looked down at Silas Granger still clutching his wounded hand. The question is whether they're right. While Thorne laid his ambush, the town of Copper Hollow stirred uneasily through the long hours of the night. Word had spread like prairie fire about what had happened at the Iron Spur, the story growing more elaborate with each retelling. 2 women had fought 20 men, no 30. They had disarmed a gang with their bare hands. They could vanish into smoke. They could dodge bullets like shadows on a wall. In the small front parlor of the Whitlock boarding house, Hannah Whitlock, a tough widow in her 60s, who had seen every kind of frontier trouble a person could see, carried a tray of tea up to the small room where her unusual guest sat in quiet meditation. Heard about the excitement at the Iron Spur, Hannah said, setting down the tray. She was one of the few people in Copper Hollow who did not seem afraid of the twins. Thorne's men are saying you're some kind of demons. We're not demons, Xiu-Lan said quietly, just women with a purpose. That's what makes you dangerous. Hannah poured the tea with steady hands. Demons you can exorcise, women with a purpose that's something else entirely. You don't seem concerned about housing us, Mei-Lin observed. Should I be? Thorne may retaliate, may decide to punish anyone who helped us. Hannah laughed, a sound like gravel rolling in a tin cup. Thorne's been bleeding this town dry for 3 years, taking what he wants, hurting who he pleases. If you two are planning to do something about that, I figure the least I can do is provide decent lodging. She paused at the door. There's a girl in this town, Mei Xiao. Her father, old Xiao Ren, runs the general store. He's sick, lung fever, real bad. Thorne's gang won't let him buy medicine unless Mei pays in ways no father should ever have to ask of his daughter. The sisters exchanged a quiet glance at the name Xiao. Not a relation, it was a common enough surname, but still it struck a chord. Why are you telling us this? Mei-Lin asked. Because tomorrow when you do what you came to do, you'll probably leave a lot of Thorne's men on the ground. And if that happens, if this town somehow gets free of his grip, I want you to know it meant something. It'll mean Mei Xiao doesn't have to make a choice that would haunt her to her grave. It'll mean old Xiao might live to see another spring. It'll mean something. She left before either sister could respond, closing the door softly behind her. In the silence that followed, Xiu-Lan stood and walked to the window. The street below was empty now, though lights still burned inside the Iron Spur. We're not heroes, she said. No, Mei-Lin agreed. We're just trying to finish what we started 15 years ago. But if we happen to free this town in the process. She trailed off, then added more softly. Maybe Master Wu was wrong. Maybe some poisons cure more than they kill. The night deepened. In various corners of Copper Hollow, men prepared for the coming dawn in their own ways. Some checked their weapons with trembling hands. Some drank themselves into a brittle courage. Some prayed to gods they had long ignored. In a small house at the edge of town, Mei Xiao sat beside her father's bed, wiping his fevered brow with a damp cloth and trying not to think about the answer she would have to give Thorne's man at sunrise. And in the back room of the Iron Spur, Thorne spread a hand-drawn map of the town across the table and began marking positions with the stub of a pencil. Put Johnson and Blake on the mercantile roof, he told Cade. Those are our best long-range shooters. Put 3 men in the livery, good cover, good angles on the street. 4 more behind the water troughs here and here. What about you, boss? I'll be in the middle of the street, right in the open. If those women want Granger, they'll have to come through me to get him. Cade studied the map, frowning. Boss, this puts a lot of men in a small area. If things go bad, we're all dead anyway. Thorne cut him off. These women ain't like anyone we've faced before. Normal tactics won't work. We need overwhelming force concentrated in one place, or we're dead men walking. Cade said carefully. We could just give them Granger. Thorne's hand moved to his gun with the casual speed of long practice. Cade froze. Say that again, Thorne said quietly. I'm just thinking out loud, boss. Granger's one man. We're a gang. Gangs survive by looking out for the gang, not for individuals. Gangs survive by never showing weakness. Thorne's voice was low and cold. Gangs survive by making sure that nobody, not the law, not vigilantes, not 2 women in silk dresses, nobody touches what's mine. If I hand him over, if I show that kind of fear, every 2-bit gunslinger and badge-wearing marshal in 3 territories will think they can push me around. The gang falls apart in a week. And if we lose tomorrow, then we lose fighting. That's the only way this ends with the Thorne name intact. Thorne released his grip on his pistol. Cade exhaled slowly. Now get the men positioned. I want everyone in place an hour before dawn. And Cade, no more talk about giving up Granger. That option died the moment those women made this personal. Yes, boss. Cade turned to leave. At the door, Thorne's voice stopped him. One more thing. Send somebody out to the old depot. There's something in the strongbox back there I want brought up. The leather-bound book, silk-wrapped. Cade turned back confused. The old Chinese book. Why, what's that got to do with? Just get it. Alone again with Silas Granger. Thorne stared at the wounded man for a long moment. Silas, who had been half dozing from pain and exhaustion, slowly registered the attention and raised his head. Boss, that journal, Thorne said slowly, the one you and Wadsworth killed the Lee family over. Whatever happened to it? Silas's eyes flickered just a fraction before he answered. Wadsworth took it. Sold it back east, I always figured. Never saw it after that night. You're lying to me again, Granger. Silas said nothing. See, Thorne continued, a few years back when you first rode into my outfit, you brought a bedroll and a saddle and not much else. But there was a bundle wrapped in old silk at the bottom of your kit. I made it my business to know what my men were carrying. Had one of the boys take a look while you were drunk one night. Leather binding, Chinese characters, very old, very valuable. Silas's face had gone gray again. I had Cade move it to the strongbox in the old stage depot for safekeeping. Figured one day I'd ask you about it. Never got around to it. Until now. Boss, please. Those women are hunting you because of that book. Their father died protecting it. Their mother died protecting it. And all this time you had it. Not Wadsworth. You. Silas's silence was all the answer Thorne needed. When Wadsworth realized the authorities in Fuzhou were closing in on the foreigners, he panicked. Stashed the book somewhere. Told you boys he'd sold it. But you knew better, didn't you, Granger? You went back and you found it. You've been carrying it ever since. Sitting on the one thing in the world that could buy your life if those women ever caught up with you. It wasn't like that. Shut up. Thorne poured himself another drink, his mind working furiously now. You stupid son of a bitch. You've been carrying your own death sentence around in a silk wrapper for 15 years. Too scared to sell it and draw attention. Too scared to throw it away. Too scared to use it as a bargain chip. Thorne, I swear to you, if I'd known. Hush now. Thorne's voice was almost gentle. I need to think. Outside, the first faint gray of false dawn was beginning to touch the eastern rim of the canyon wall. Thorne stared at the map of Copper Hollow, spread across the table, and felt the slow, patient weight of a new calculation settling into place. He had planned an ambush, a killing ground, overwhelming force. But now he had something else, something better perhaps. He had a bargaining chip. Whether he would use it or whether pride would get the better of him in the cold light of dawn was a question Caleb Thorne had not yet answered even to himself. In the Whitlock boarding house, the candle had finally guttered out. Mei-Lin and Xiu-Lan Zhao sat in the pre-dawn darkness, their breathing synchronized, their minds clear. This was how Master Wu had taught them to prepare for a fight they might not survive, not with rage, not with fear, but with emptiness. Become nothing, he had said, and you become everything. Sister Mei-Lin said softly as the first gray light began to touch the eastern sky. If something goes wrong tomorrow, if one of us falls, we finish it anyway, Xiu-Lan interrupted. Together or alone. We made a promise. I know, but if I fall, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Xiu-Lan's voice was firm. You would do the same for me. We are two parts of one purpose. That is what we have always been. Mei-Lin reached across the space between them and took her sister's hand. For a moment, they were not warriors. They were not legends. They were two women, two sisters bound by something older and deeper than vengeance. Then the moment passed and they were weapons again, being sharpened for one final edge. They dressed carefully, choosing practical clothes, this time dark trousers, fitted shirts of heavy cotton, sturdy riding boots. The silk dresses had made a statement the night before. This morning called for different tools. They checked their weapons one final time, pistols loaded and clean, blades sharp and balanced, everything in its proper place. As the sun began to paint the copper walls of the canyon with shades of rose and gold, they left the boarding house and walked toward Main Street. The town was silent, holding its breath. Curtains twitched in windows as people watched the two women stride with purpose toward the heart of Copper Hollow. Thorne's men were already in position. Mei-Lin and Xiu-Lan noted each one with quick professional glances. Rooftop shooters on the mercantile men crouched behind the water troughs, 3 rifle barrels just visible inside the livery. A well-planned ambush, assuming one's opponents planned to fight conventionally. Caleb Thorne stood in the middle of Main Street, exactly where he had said he would be. Silas Granger stood beside him, looking like a man already half in his own grave. Behind them, arranged in a loose semicircle, stood what was left of the Thorne gang, perhaps 15 men with their weapons drawn and their faces hard with the particular desperation of men who have been told this is their last stand. But there was something in Thorne's stance that the sisters read instantly. Something uncertain. Something not quite right. A man who had decided to fight did not stand that way. A man who had decided to fight did not hold his left hand at his side, fingers curling as though around the memory of another object. Something else was coming. The sisters stopped 50 feet away. For a long moment, nobody moved. The desert wind kicked dust devils between them. Somewhere a shutter banged. A horse whinnied nervously in the livery. Last chance, Thorne called out, his voice rough. Walk away, leave town. We'll forget this ever happened. Will you forget what was done to our parents? Mei-Lin's voice carried clearly in the morning stillness. I didn't do nothing to your parents. That was Granger's business, not mine. You made it your business when you chose to stand with him. Thorne shrugged, a deliberately casual gesture. Then I guess we all got choices to make this morning. We made ours 15 years ago, Xiu-Lan said. The tension stretched tighter like a piano wire being pulled to its breaking point. Men shifted behind their cover. Nervous fingers brushed triggers. The rooftop shooters adjusted their aim, tracking the two women standing so calmly in their gun sights. And then Thorne did something the sisters had not expected. He raised his left hand slowly, carefully, showing it to them empty. Then he reached into the leather satchel slung across his massive chest and drew out a bundle wrapped in silk so old the color had faded to the dull brown of dried leaves. Mei-Lin went very still. Beside her, Xiu-Lan's breath caught a tiny sound no one but her sister would have heard. Thorne held the bundle up where they could see it. I believe, he said, his voice carrying across the 50 feet of dust between them, that this belongs to your family. He let the silk fall away. The leather beneath it was dark with age, the Chinese characters pressed into its cover, barely legible, the binding held together by wax thread that had been mended many times. 1,000 years old if Silas had told the truth. And for 15 of those 1,000 years, it had belonged by blood and by promise to the Zhao sisters. It was their father's journal, their inheritance, the very thing their parents had died to protect. Mei-Lin felt the ground seem to shift beneath her feet. 15 years of certainty. 15 years of a simple, clean equation: find the men, Kill the men, finish the promise, suddenly cracked and complicated into something she had not anticipated. Where did you get that? She asked, and for the first time since they had entered Copper Hollow, her voice carried the faintest tremor. Granger's been carrying it since the night your parents died. Never sold it, never dared. I took it off him this morning. Thorne's eyes held hers across the dusty street. Now here's how this morning is going to go. You two are going to holster those pretty pistols and walk back out of my town. And when you're going, I'll leave this book on the steps of the Whitlock boarding house for you to collect on your way out. You'll have what your parents died for. And Granger and me will go on about our business. And if we don't, Xiu-Lan's voice was quiet, clinical. Thorne raised the journal higher. A sulfur match appeared in his right hand. Then I burn it. Right here. Right now. 1,000 years of your father's teacher's lineage gone in the same kind of fire that took your mama and your papa. And then we fight anyway, and maybe we all die, but you'll have come 10,000 miles for absolutely nothing. Your parents will have died for nothing. Your whole life will have been spent hunting down a book you let burn twice. The silence that followed was the longest of Mei-Lin Zhao's life. She had been prepared for an ambush. She had been prepared for treachery, for guns from windows, and knives from alleys, for Thorne to fight dirty, and for Silas Granger to try to flee. She had not been prepared for this. She had not been prepared to have her parents' murder dangled in front of her like a cruel charm offered in exchange for her silence. She looked at Xiu-Lan, and in her sister's eyes she saw the same terrible calculation taking shape, because they both understood in that single suspended instant what Thorne was truly doing. He was not just bargaining for his life or for Granger's. He was trying to force them to choose their parents' memory or their parents' legacy. Vengeance, or the one thing their mother and father had given their lives to preserve. He was trying to make them kill the thing they had been protecting all along. Mei-Lin's hand did not move toward her gun. Xiu-Lan's did not either. But the air between the sisters grew charged in a way the watching men could feel but not name, as though two identical minds were speaking in a language made entirely of pauses and heartbeats. And somewhere behind Thorne, half hidden in the shadow of the Iron Spurs porch, Silas Granger began to inch backward, because Silas Granger had just realized with the terrible clarity of a cornered animal that his own boss had found a card worth more than his life. And whichever way the sisters answered, Silas was not going to walk out of Copper Hollow alive. The first ray of full sunlight crested the copper rim of the canyon wall and struck the dusty street like the opening of an eye. And Mei-Lin Zhao drew a slow, measured breath and prepared to speak the words that would decide everything for herself, for her sister, for the town of Copper Hollow, and for the final chapter of a vengeance that had begun in a burning garden half a world away. "Put it down, Mr. Thorne," Mei-Lin said, and her voice was so perfectly even it might have been carved from winter ice. "Put the journal down and step 3 paces back, and we will talk about what happens next." Thorne did not move. The match stayed in his hand, unstruck, but ready. "I asked for an answer," he said, "not a negotiation. You are about to burn the only thing in the world that might save your life. I suggest you give me a moment to explain why." Something in her tone made him pause. It was not fear. It was not pleading. It was the calm, measured voice of a physician's daughter who had just realized there was a way to cut without bleeding the patient. "Talk then," Thorne said, "but the match stays in my hand." Mei-Lin took one slow step forward. Xiu-Lan mirrored her exactly, staying at her sister's left shoulder like the second half of a closing fan. "That journal," Mei-Lin said, "is a Song Dynasty medical text, a record of herbal formulas, surgical techniques, diagnostic methods. It is worth a great deal of money to the right collector. Your former employer, Phineas Wadsworth, was prepared to kill for it, and the men back east he intended to sell it to would have paid a sum most frontier towns could not dream of. You know this? That is why Silas Granger has carried it for 15 years without selling it. The moment that book appears at any auction house or private collection, the buyer becomes a target. Silas knew that. That is why it is still wrapped in silk in your satchel and not hanging in a Boston library." "Get to the point, woman." "My point, Mr. Thorne, is that you do not want to burn that book. You want to keep it, because that book is the only thing standing between you and our guns. And because that book in the right hands is worth more than every cent you have extorted from Copper Hollow in 3 years. Thorne's squinting eye narrowed further. And you're going to tell me whose hands those are, I suppose. Ours, Mei-Lin said simply. We are our father's daughters. We know what the journal contains. We know which formulas are genuinely ancient and which are later additions. We can authenticate it in a way no white collector ever could. If you give us the book, we will give you something in return that is worth more than its sale price. And what would that be? Your life, your men's lives, and safe passage out of this territory. A short, ugly laugh escaped Thorne's throat. Lady, you must think I was born under a cabbage leaf. You want me to hand you back the one thing keeping me alive, and trust that once you've got it, you won't put a bullet in my head for the principle of the thing. You have our word. Your word, Thorne shook his head. I don't know you. I don't know what your word is worth. It is worth the lives of 4 men before you, Xiu-Lan said quietly. Phineas Wadsworth begged for his life, and we had given him no promise. He died. Jonas Beckwith tried to buy his life with money. He died. Elias Hargrove swore on his mother's grave. He died. If our word was not worth anything, we would have promised all of them mercy and killed them anyway. Instead, we promised them nothing because we had no mercy to give. Today, for the first time in 15 years, we are offering a promise. That should tell you something. Thorne looked at her for a long moment. What's changed? The journal, Mei-Lin said. Seeing it again. Seeing that some part of what our parents built did not burn. For 15 years, we believed their entire life had turned to ash. Now we know something survived, and we find we will not let it burn a second time, even to complete our vengeance. Silas Granger, who had been edging backward throughout this exchange, chose that moment to make his play. He had managed to put the corner of the Iron Spurs porch between himself and most of the guns, and now he bolted, making for the alley that ran between the saloon and the assayer's office, his wounded hand clutched to his chest, his boots kicking up red dust. Thorne did not even turn his head. Cade, he said. Ezra Cade's rifle was already rising. The shot cracked across Main Street like a whip. Silas Granger pitched forward into the dust of the alley mouth and did not rise. The sound of the shot seemed to hang in the air for a very long time. Mei-Lin's expression did not change, but something inside her went quiet in a way she had not expected. 15 years of preparation, 15 years of hunting, 15 years of imagining the moment when Silas Granger would die at her hand or her sister's. And in the end, it had taken a single rifle shot from one of his own companions, fired out of convenience, fired to prevent him from slipping out of a bargaining equation. She had not killed him. She had not saved him. He had simply been removed from the board like a pawn knocked aside by a careless elbow. She discovered that she did not know how to feel about it. The last man who murdered your parents is dead, Thorne said into the silence. He did not sound triumphant. He sounded tired. You can tell yourselves you finished your promise if that helps, or you can tell yourselves it was a mercy he didn't deserve. Either way, your hunt is over. Now we're going to talk about this book. You shot your own man, Xiu-Lan said. I shot a man who was about to make our negotiation complicated. Granger was dead the moment he tried to run, dead as a bargaining chip, dead as a gang member, dead as anything useful to me. I just made his condition official. Thorne's expression was unreadable. Now, the book. You want it. I want to keep my men breathing. Let's find a way to make both those things happen. For the second time in a handful of minutes, Mei-Lin Zhao felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She had expected to fight her way through the Thorne gang to reach Silas Granger. She had expected to stand over him, to look him in the eye, to decide in that final moment whether her parents' daughters would pull the trigger or offer the mercy that would mark their transformation from weapons into something else. She had spent 15 years rehearsing that moment in her mind. Instead, Silas Granger lay dead in an alley, killed by his own ally. And Mei-Lin was standing in the middle of a dusty street, bargaining with a frontier outlaw for the return of her father's journal. Nothing about this morning resembled what she had prepared for, and yet something inside her, something she had not felt in 15 years, was beginning to breathe, because her hands were still clean of Silas Granger's blood, and the journal was still whole, and the promise she had made it to her parents' ghosts was in some strange way she could not quite name being kept without being fulfilled. Put the match down, Mr. Thorne, she said softly, and we will talk. Thorne hesitated. Then slowly he lowered the match and slipped it into his vest pocket. The silk-wrapped journal he placed carefully on top of a wooden packing crate, at the edge of the boardwalk, still within his reach, but no longer an inch from the flame. Talk. How much were you hoping to sell it for? Wadsworth, when he was alive, talked about 2,000 in gold, from the right buyer in New York or Philadelphia. We will give you 1,000 in gold in hand within 30 days, and safe passage out of the territory, and the knowledge that the Zhao sisters will not hunt you. Thorne's eyes narrowed. And where do two Chinese women come by 1,000 in gold? That, Mei-Lin said, is not your concern. What should be your concern is whether you prefer to gamble on selling a priceless manuscript to a white collector who may very well cut your throat for it, or whether you prefer to take a guaranteed sum from two women who have a personal interest in seeing the transaction completed peacefully. It was a lie, of course. They did not have 1,000 in gold. They had perhaps 200 between them saved from bounty work and the small fees healers could charge in mining camps. But Hannah Whitlock had mentioned letters of introduction to people in Denver and San Francisco, and if there was one thing Mei-Lin Zhao had learned in 15 years of hunting, it was that time could be bought with a promise, and a promise could be delivered if one was willing to work hard enough. Thorne was silent for a long moment. His men shifted nervously behind their cover, waiting for a signal. And then something unexpected happened. From the far end of Main Street, an old man's voice called out, raised with difficulty, thin with illness, but carrying a strange authority nonetheless. "Mr. Thorne, a word if you please." Every head turned. Old Xiao-Ren had stepped out from the doorway of his general store, leaning heavily on a polished cane carved with characters no man in Copper Hollow could read. His daughter Mei Xiao stood beside him, trying to support his elbow, but the old man waved her gently aside and began to walk slowly, painfully into the middle of the street. "Get back inside, old man," Thorne growled. "This ain't your fight." "It is my fight," Xiao-Ren said. He did not stop walking until he stood between the Zhao sisters and Thorne's gang, an old, sick, unarmed man placing his frail body directly in the path of whatever bullets might yet fly. "I am Xiao-Ren. My family came from Fujian province 3 generations ago. When I heard the name spoken in this street last night, when I heard the name of Dr. Li Wenhao, I remembered stories my grandfather used to tell. Dr. Li was famous among our people, even across the ocean. A physician who treated the poor without payment, a scholar who shared his knowledge freely, a man whose teacher's lineage was older than the Ming dynasty." He turned to the Zhao sisters, and to their shock switched into flawless Mandarin, the first they had heard spoken by anyone but each other in more years than they could count. "Daughters of Li Wenhao, I'm a dying man. I have perhaps weeks left, perhaps less. What I say next I say because I have nothing left to lose, and because the ghosts of your parents deserve a voice in their own final chapter." He drew a labored breath. "Your father would not have wanted you to trade his journal for the life of his murderer, but nor would he have wanted you to let the journal burn. He would have wanted his daughters to take it home, to honor it, to pass it on. He would have wanted the knowledge inside it to heal people, not to be a chip in a game of violence between killers." Mei-Lin's hand trembled for the first time that morning. Hearing her father's name spoken in the language of her childhood by a stranger who knew it only from grandfather's stories struck something deep and unguarded inside her. "He also would not have wanted men like Thorne to walk free," she said in Mandarin, because she could not bring herself to speak English in that moment. "He would have wanted you alive," Xiao-Ren replied gently, "alive and carrying his name. Your father believed in justice, but he believed more in the preservation of wisdom. A library of ashes cannot teach. A dead healer cannot heal. Take the journal, let Thorne go, and spend the rest of your lives making sure that your father's knowledge carried in your father's book saves more lives than you have ended." He switched back to English, his voice raised now so that Thorne and every man behind him could hear. "Mr. Thorne, you have asked for a bargain. Here is one I believe these women will accept, and one that I, as a merchant of this town, am prepared to guarantee. Give them the journal. Riding out of Copper Hollow, you and your men today, before noon. Do not return. The Xiao family will underwrite $1,000 in gold to be delivered to a bank of your choosing in Cheyenne within 30 days. I will co-sign a letter of credit to this effect here and now, witnessed by the women of Copper Hollow, whose names mean something in the merchant houses of San Francisco." Mei-Lin turned to him in astonishment. "Sir," she said in Mandarin, "you do not have $1,000 in gold. I can see the condition of your store. I can see your daughter's hands. You cannot make that guarantee. I cannot, Xiao-Ren agreed softly, but I can sign a paper that will not come due until after my death, and by then I believe you will have found a way to honor it, because you are your father's daughters, and because your father would expect it of you, and because I have just bought the life of my daughter with a debt that will outlive me, and I find strangely that this is the best bargain I have ever made. Mei Xiao, who had been watching her father with growing horror, started to protest. He silenced her with a single raised hand. Hush, child. Let me finish what little good I can still do in this world. Thorne was staring at the old man as though a stone had begun to speak. In all his years of shaking down frontier towns, no one had ever done this, not for themselves and certainly not for strangers. No one had ever stepped directly into his line of fire and offered to buy peace with money that did not exist. You're crazy, old man, Thorne said, but his voice lacked conviction. I am dying, Mr. Thorne. That is a different thing from crazy. A dying man can afford to be honest, can afford to choose the shape of his last weeks. I am choosing this shape. $1,000, 30 days delivered to any bank you name. My word and the word of these women witnessed by every person on this street. The street was absolutely silent. From the boardwalks and doorways, the people of Copper Hollow watched in disbelief. Something was happening here that none of them had ever seen, a negotiation in which the frailest person present was setting the terms. Thorne looked at the Zhao sisters. Mei-Lin met his eyes steadily. We accept Mr. Xiao's terms, she said. The journal returns to us. The debt is ours to honor. You ride out. You do not return. And you do not ever, on any road you travel for the rest of your life, speak our names or our father's name to another living soul. Thorne was quiet for a long time. Behind him, his men waited, guns drawn, eyes flicking between their boss and the two women and the old dying merchant who had just rewritten the morning's arithmetic. Finally, Thorne laughed. It was not a pleasant sound, but it was not a cruel one either. It was the laugh of a man who had lived a violent life and suddenly found himself in a scene from a play he did not recognize. You know what? He said. I've been doing this work for 20 years and I ain't never seen anything like this morning. I came out here ready to die in a gunfight. I came out here ready to trade a bone for my life. I did not come out here ready to be bought off by a dying old man who don't even own his own store anymore. He picked up the silk-wrapped journal from the packing crate, walked 3 deliberate paces forward, and held it out with both hands to Mei-Lin Zhao. She took it. The weight of it in her hands, the actual physical weight of the leather binding and the brittle pages, was something she had not expected. It felt heavier than it looked. It felt like her father's hands. 30 days, Thorne said. Cheyenne, the First Territorial Bank. 1,000 in gold under the name Caleb Thorne. If it's there, you'll never see me again. If it ain't there, he shrugged. I won't be coming back for the book, but I'll remember who made a promise and didn't keep it, and I'll find a way to make that mean something somewhere down the line. It will be there, Mei-Lin said. Thorne nodded once, then he turned to his men. Cade, get the boys mounted. We're riding for Cheyenne. And any man who wants to stay behind in Copper Hollow can stay. I ain't your boss no more. I ain't anybody's boss after this morning. I got a dead brother to bury and a strange debt to collect, and I find I don't much have the stomach for running a gang anymore. The announcement hit the men behind him like a physical blow. Cade's mouth actually fell open. Boss, you heard me, Cade. Mount up if you're coming. Stay if you're staying. But Caleb Thorne's gang is dissolved as of right now in the middle of Main Street, Copper Hollow, Arizona Territory, on October morning in 1879 in front of witnesses. It was the strangest surrender the frontier had ever seen. Within 20 minutes, Thorne and 8 of his men had ridden out of Copper Hollow, heading north toward the Cheyenne Road. 6 others, including Rance Dooley, a lean man with a scar running from his ear to his jaw, chose to stay behind, claiming they had nowhere else to go. The people of Copper Hollow emerged slowly from their houses and shops, as though unsure whether the scene they were watching was real. Mei-Lin Zhao stood in the middle of Main Street, her father's journal in her hands, and tried to understand what had just happened. Beside her, Xiu-Lan was quietly weeping, not from grief and not quite from relief, but from some third thing that had no name. And Xiao-Ren, the old dying merchant, who had just staked a fortune he did not have on the honor of two strangers from across the sea, was sagging against his daughter's supporting arm and smiling in a way that suggested he had not smiled for a very long time. "Father, you should not have," Mei Xiao began. "I should have," Xiao-Ren said firmly. "I have been a merchant for 50 years, daughter. I have never made a more important trade. Now take me home. I need to sit down." Mei-Lin crossed to them, the journal clutched against her chest. "Mr. Xiao, we cannot thank you. The debt you have taken on our behalf is not a debt, child. It is an investment. My only condition is that when you find a way to honor it, you do so by helping someone else. That is how debts of this kind are properly paid." He swayed on his feet, then and his daughter and Mei-Lin caught him together and helped him to the steps of the general store. Xiu-Lan ran ahead to fetch water, and Hannah Whitlock appeared from somewhere with a chair, and within minutes a small crowd had gathered not around the Zhao sisters, but around Xiao-Ren, as though the people of Copper Hollow were only now understanding that one of their own had in the course of a single morning done something that would be told about for generations. Mei-Lin knelt beside the old man and carefully unwrapped the silk bundle in her lap. The journal was exactly as she remembered it from her father's study: dark leather wax thread, Chinese characters pressed into the cover in a careful scholar's hand. She opened it at a random page, and there in ink that had not entirely faded after 1,000 years was a diagram of the human meridians annotated in her father's own neat hand, with comments on herbs that might stimulate each point. Her father's handwriting, his careful marginal notes. His life distilled into ink and paper, and the quiet, patient work of a physician who had loved both his patients and his books. She closed the journal gently. "Sister," she said softly without looking up, "what do we do now?" Xiu-Lan knelt beside her. "I think," she said slowly, "we take Mr. Xiao home, and we brew his medicine properly this time with the formulas from the journal, and then we go see the town of Copper Hollow. All of it. The sick people, the injured, the ones no one has ever bothered to treat because they could not pay. I think we spend the next 30 days here. I think we help this town the way our mother would have helped it. And the $1,000, we will find a way." Hannah Whitlock's letters of introduction, perhaps? Or the journal itself, not to sell, but to offer authentication services to legitimate collectors. Our father would have approved of that. He always said the journal's true value was in what it could teach, not what it could fetch at an auction. Mei-Lin smiled for the first time that morning. It was a small, tentative smile, like the first green leaf pushing up through ground that had been frozen for a very long winter. "And after the 30 days, Xiu-Lan said, "we find out who we are when we are no longer hunters." They helped Xiao-Ren to his feet and walked him slowly back toward his house, the crowd parting respectfully before them. Mei Xiao supported her father from one side and Mei-Lin from the other, and Xiu-Lan walked behind carrying the silk-wrapped journal against her chest as though it were a newborn. The October sun climbed higher over the copper walls of the canyon, and the light that fell into the dusty main street of Copper Hollow was the color of a long-delayed morning finally arriving. Behind them in the alley beside the Iron Spur Ranch, Dooley and two other men were quietly discussing what to do with the body of Silas Granger, and more urgently, what to do with themselves now that Caleb Thorne had ridden out of their lives and left them without a boss, a plan, or a place in the world. Dooley was lean and mean and scarred, and the look in his eyes as he watched the Zhao sisters walk the dying old man home was not a friendly one. He had been one of the men wounded in the Iron Spur the night before, and he was not a man who forgot a humiliation easily. But for the moment, the sun was rising. The journal was safe. The last of the men who had killed Dr. Li Wenhao was dead in an alley, killed by a rifle bullet fired by a stranger. And Mei-Lin and Xiu-Lan Zhao were walking an old dying man home through a town that was beginning to believe for the first time in 3 years that mornings could be something other than a new occasion for fear. The 15-year hunt was not over, not quite, but for the first time its shape was beginning to change into something the Zhao sisters had never prepared for a future. The next 3 weeks transformed Copper Hollow in ways both visible and subtle, and they transformed the Zhao sisters in ways that were neither. It began the first afternoon when Mei-Lin opened the journal on the kitchen table of Xiao-Ren's small adobe house and began very carefully to translate the relevant passages for a lung complaint into formulas that could be assembled from the meager stock of the general store and whatever wild herbs still grew along the canyon seeps. Xiu-Lan went out with Mei Xiao to gather what was needed. By nightfall, a clay pot was steaming on the stove, and by morning, Xiao Ren was breathing more easily than he had in 6 months. By the third day, word had spread through Copper Hollow that the Chinese women were not only dangerous, they were also healers, and they were charging nothing. The line outside the general store began on the fourth morning and did not meaningfully shorten for the next 3 weeks. Miners with crushed hands, a saloon girl with an infection that no white doctor in the territory would have deigned to touch, ranchers' children with summer fevers, an old widow with the beginnings of what Mei-Lin recognized from her father's marginal notes as a condition of the blood that would soon become untreatable if nothing was done. The sisters worked from dawn until well past dark, and in the evenings they taught Mei Xiao everything they could, the names of the herbs in Mandarin, and in English, the timing of infusions, the ways to read a pulse, the difference between formulas that could be mixed and formulas that must never touch each other. Mei Xiao proved a quick and careful student. Her father watched from his chair by the window, his breathing easier day by day, and he smiled the small, quiet smile of a man who had lived long enough to see a gamble pay off. Hannah Whitlock, meanwhile, threw herself into the practical business of the $1,000 debt. Her letters of introduction, it turned out, were not the casual referrals she had first described. She had, in her long life, done significant favors for several merchant families in San Francisco and Denver, and those families now held letters in her hand that were something close to unpaid gratitude. Within a week, she had received 3 telegraph replies, 2 from San Francisco, 1 from a small Chinese merchant house in Denver, expressing interest in authentication services for rare Asian manuscripts, with fees that would, if all 3 commissions were accepted, come to rather more than $1,000 in gold. The journal, which had almost burned in the dust of Main Street, was about to save not only its owners, but the debt that had been taken on their behalf. None of this was peaceful, however, not entirely. On the 5th morning, while Mei-Lin was grinding dried licorice root in the back of the general store, a shadow fell across the doorway behind her. She did not turn. She knew the way a physician's daughter knows such things, that the step on the threshold belonged to a man who had drawn a knife recently and intended to draw one again. "Rance Dooley," she said without looking up. "You got a good memory for names." "I have a good memory for men who carry grudges the way other men carry loose change." Dooley laughed a short, unpleasant sound and stepped fully into the back room. He had his pistol holstered, but his right hand rested on the butt of it in a way that was not accidental. Behind him, Xiu-Lan appeared silently in the doorway from the main shop, a clay cup in her hand, her expression unchanging. "I ain't here to fight," Dooley said, raising his left hand. "I'm here to make a proposition." "Speak then." "Thorne's gone. Half the boys rode out with him. The rest of us, me, Pritchard, young Tomas, and 3 others, we ain't got nothing. No work, no place, no prospects. Town won't hire us. Farms won't hire us. We're stuck here with 6 guns and nowhere to point them. That is not our problem, Mr. Dooley. It's about to be." Dooley's voice hardened. "See words getting around. 2 Chinese women in Copper Hollow healing for free, sitting on a priceless book owed $1,000 by a dying old man. That's the kind of story that travels. And there's men in this territory who'd hear that story and see an opportunity. Real bad men. Worse than Thorne, maybe. Word gets to the wrong ear, and in 2 weeks' time, you got 20 new guns riding down that canyon road with bad intentions. And you propose to protect us from them for a fee. I propose you hire us. Me and the 5 boys who stayed. We used to be the trouble in this town. Now we'd be the ones keeping the trouble out. Think of it as, what's the word, reformed." Mei-Lin finally looked up from her pestle. She studied Dooley's face for a long, slow moment. The scar from ear to jaw. The eyes that had never learned to meet another person's directly. The hand still resting on his pistol, which had not moved the whole time they had been speaking. "Mr. Dooley," she said gently, "I do not think you are reformed. I think you are hungry. Those are not the same thing, but I will tell you what I am willing to do." She set down the pestle and walked around the table until she was standing perhaps 4 feet from him, close enough that his hand instinctively tightened on his pistol, far enough that he would not be able to draw before she took him apart. "I will pay you and your 5 men $2 a day each for the next 25 days to ride the roads into Copper Hollow and turn back anyone who looks like trouble. I will pay you in advance for the first week in silver out of what my sister and I have saved. In return, you will not enter this store without permission. You will not speak to the women of this town in any way that frightens them, and you will not under any circumstances draw a weapon on a citizen of Copper Hollow for any reason short of defending that citizen's life. Dooley stared at her. That's a pretty generous offer considering. Considering what? Considering you could just kill us all. Yes, Mei-Lin said simply. I could. But then I would have to explain to Mr. Xiao why his investment in my soul had failed. And I find I am not willing to disappoint a dying man who staked $1,000 on my honor. So instead, I am offering to hire the men who would have been my next problem in the hope that by the time our 25 days are up, you will have found a better use for your lives than waiting for the next frontier tyrant to come along and give you orders. Dooley was silent for a long moment. His hand slowly left his pistol. I'll talk to the boys, he said. Do that. And Mr. Dooley, if any of you decide that $2 a day is an insult and that you would rather try to take the journal by force, I will kill every one of you in the street before the sun is 2 fingers above the canyon rim. I am telling you this not as a threat, but as a fact the way I would tell a patient that a certain herb in a certain dose will stop his heart. Decide accordingly. Dooley swallowed, nodded once, and left without another word. When he was gone, Xiu-Lan crossed the room and set the clay cup on the table. Sister, she said, I do not think he will betray us. Neither do I, not for the first week at least. After that we will see. And if he does, then I will do exactly what I said I would do, but I do not think it will come to that. Rance Dooley has never in his life been offered an honest wage for work he was capable of performing. Sometimes that kind of offer changes a man more than 15 years of hunting ever could. Xiu-Lan looked at her sister for a long moment. When did you become so wise about men, Mei-Lin? About the same time you became so wise about sisters, I think. They shared a small private smile, and Mei-Lin returned to her licorice root, and the afternoon went on. By the 10th day, a kind of uneasy equilibrium had settled over Copper Hollow. Dooley and his 5 men patrolled the 3 roads into town with surprising discipline, turning back 2 drifters who fit the description of trouble and escorting in a traveling Presbyterian minister who did not. The minister, a tall, grave-faced man named Reverend Hollister, was so startled to be met at the canyon mouth by polite armed escorts that he nearly turned his wagon around. Instead, he ended up staying 3 days performing 2 long-delayed marriages and 1 baptism and preaching a Sunday sermon in which he declared without quite seeming to believe himself that the Lord's work was sometimes done by the strangest hands. Mei Xiao took over the distribution of herbal preparations from the back of the general store, learning the formulas so quickly that Mei-Lin privately began to believe the girl might have been born to the work. Xiao Ring, gaining strength day by day, began to teach her to read some of the Chinese characters in the journal, not enough to decipher the medical passages, but enough to understand the names of the plants and the cardinal directions of the body. And then on the morning of the 12th day, something happened that Mei-Lin Zhao had not prepared for at all. She was sweeping the front porch of the Whitlock boarding house at dawn when she saw a figure walking up Main Street from the south, an old man in a dusty gray robe, his white beard reaching nearly to his waist, a long walking staff in his hand, and a small bundle slung across his back. He moved slowly but without any sign of frailty, the way a very old tree moves when it sways in a wind that would topple younger trees. Mei-Lin's hand went still on the broom. She knew that walk. She had not seen it in 5 years. She had last seen it in a mountain pass in southern China, the day she and Xiu-Lan had finally left Master Wu Jianping and turned their faces toward the sea. Master Wu had been old then. He should have been long dead by now. He was not dead. He was walking up Main Street in Copper Hollow, Arizona territory, as though he had been walking all the way from Fuzhou province and had simply taken this long to arrive. Xiu-Lan, Mei-Lin said quietly, not trusting her own voice. Come outside. Xiu-Lan came, saw, and dropped the kettle she had been carrying so that it clattered on the boards of the porch and spilled hot water across her feet without her seeming to notice. Master Wu Jianping walked up the steps of the Whitlock boarding house, set down his staff, unslung his bundle, and looked at the 2 women he had trained for 10 long years and had not seen for another 5. You have grown older, he said in Mandarin. His voice was exactly as they remembered, dry as the turn of a page, patient as weathered stone. That is a good sign. It means you are still alive. Master, Mei-Lin began, and then could not finish. She sank to her knees on the boards of the porch, and Xiu-Lan sank beside her. And for a long moment, the two most dangerous women in 3 territories simply knelt in front of their old teacher, with their heads bowed and their hands folded in their laps, the way they had knelt every morning for 10 years in a courtyard 10,000 miles away. Up, Master Wu said mildly. The boards of this porch are not clean, and your knees are not what they used to be. I have come a long way, and I would like some tea, if one of you can remember how I prefer it. They rose. Xiu-Lan hurried inside to brew the tea. Mei-Lin led the old man to a chair and helped him into it with the careful reverence she had not used in years, and then sat on the step at his feet looking up at him the way she had when she was 14 years old. Master, how are you here? We last saw you in the high pass above Yanshu. Yes, I have been walking for most of the time since then. I took passage on a merchant ship 18 months ago. I have been in this country 14 months. I have been looking for you for 9. You are very difficult to follow, both of you. You leave very little trail. Why? He smiled a small, rare smile that pulled at the corners of his eyes. Because I owed you an answer I did not give you when you left my care. And because I suspected that one day, perhaps today, perhaps a year from today, you would come to the end of your hunt and find yourself standing in a strange land with clean hands or dirty hands and no idea what to do next. I wish to be present for that moment if I could manage it. It turns out I have managed it by perhaps 2 weeks. Xiu-Lan returned with the tea. Master Wu accepted the cup with both hands, inhaled the steam, and nodded approvingly. You still remember. Good. Master, Xiu-Lan said, sitting on the step beside her sister, you said you owed us an answer. I did. When you left me, you asked whether I believed your vengeance would bring you peace. I did not answer. I told you instead that you would have to find out for yourselves. That was honest, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I believed your vengeance would not bring you peace, but that I also believed you would not hear me if I said so. Some lessons cannot be taught. They can only be survived. We have survived it, Mei-Lin said quietly. I can see that. I can see it in your faces and in the way you moved just now when you rose from your knees. You are both still dangerous, but you are no longer weapons. There is a difference, and I can read it from 20 paces. So tell me, what is the answer you found? Mei-Lin and Xiu-Lan looked at each other. The answer, Mei-Lin said slowly, is that vengeance does not bring peace, but something else can, the thing you do after the vengeance is taken away from you. Ours was taken away by a bullet fired by a man we had not expected to fire it. And we found that when the last target was gone, we were not empty. We were free. And what have you done with that freedom? We have begun to heal people, using our father's journal, which was returned to us by the very man we came to fight. Master Wu's eyebrows lifted in genuine surprise the first time the sisters had ever seen him surprised in the 12 years they had known him. The journal survived. It survived. And you have it now. We have it now, in the back room of Mr. Xiao's store. We will show you. Master Wu was silent for a very long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than the sisters had ever heard it. Then the circle has closed, not the circle of vengeance that one closed the moment you chose to spare Silas Granger's life, though it was closed for you by another's hand before you had to act. The circle, I mean, is the older one. The one your father drew when he refused to sell a book to a foreign merchant. The one your mother drew when she taught you the names of herbs in the garden. The one I drew when I agreed to train 2 8-year-old girls whose hands should never have been allowed to hold a blade. All of those circles have just closed in the back room of a general store in a town none of us had ever heard of until this month. He set down his teacup. There is one more thing. I have been meaning to tell you for 15 years, and I did not tell you because I did not wish to complicate your grief. Now I think perhaps I should tell you while I still can. Tell us what Master, your mother, Su Jinhua. She was not only an herbalist. She was the elder daughter of a physician in the port city of Xiamen, whose younger daughter married a merchant who emigrated to San Francisco in 1851. That younger sister had one child, a daughter who eventually married a shopkeeper by the name of Xiao, who brought her west along the rail lines in his middle years. Mei-Lin went very still. Master, what are you telling us? I am telling you that Mei Xiao, the young woman you have been teaching for the past 12 days in the back room of her father's store, is the great niece of your mother. She is your second cousin. You are, so far as I know, her only living blood relatives on her grandmother's side. I was able to trace the lineage because I knew your mother's family before she married your father. I did not know when you left China where your cousin had ended up. I learned during my months of following your trail through the American West. I had intended to find you and tell you before you left for your next hunt. I did not expect to find you already in the same house with her healing her father. The porch of the Whitlock boarding house went very, very quiet. Mei-Lin discovered that she was crying without being aware of the moment her tears had started. Beside her, Xiu-Lan had gone perfectly still, her hands clenched in the cotton of her trousers, her face the face of a woman who has just been handed an impossible gift. She is afraid to accept for fear it will vanish. Mei Xiao, Mei-Lin said at last carefully, is our cousin. She is your cousin. Does she know? She does not. Her father may know something. The old man has the eyes of a man who has recognized a resemblance he did not dare believe. You might ask him when you are ready. I thought it best if the telling came from you and from the names you have each been carrying. Xiu-Lan drew a long, unsteady breath. Master, why did you come so far to tell us this? Master Wu looked at her with great patience. Because you had family in this country, and you did not know. Because the whole of your adult lives has been spent believing you were alone in the world, except for each other. Because a woman who believes she is alone makes different choices than a woman who knows she has kin. I could not bring you your parents back. I could not undo the night of the fire. But I could cross an ocean and carry you the name of one living person on this continent who is of your blood. That seemed to me a thing worth walking a year to do. Mei-Lin rose unsteadily to her feet. Xiu-Lan rose with her. We must go to the store, Mei-Lin said. Of course. Master, will you come with us? No, child. This is a thing for the three of you. I will drink my tea and I will wait, and I will be here when you return. I have waited 15 years. Another hour is nothing. They left him on this porch, the morning sun warming his white beard and his dusty gray robe, the teacup still steaming in his hands. And they walked down the plank sidewalk of Main Street toward the general store, and they did not speak because there were no words that would have survived the passage from heart to mouth in that moment. When they reached the store, Mei Xiao was already behind the counter, carefully measuring dried astragalus root into small paper packets with the precise, serious attention of a girl who had found her calling. She looked up when the sisters came in and smiled and said something cheerful about the morning. And then she saw their faces and the smile faded and she set down the packet she was holding. What has happened is my father— Yeah, your father as well, Mei-Lin said. Her voice was not quite steady. Your father is resting. Mei, we need to tell you something. Will you sit down? Mei Xiao sat looking frightened. Xiao Ren, who had been dozing in his chair by the window, opened his eyes at the change in the voices and watched carefully without speaking. Mei-Lin knelt in front of her cousin, The word was so new it felt like glass in her mouth, and took the young woman's hands in her own. Our mother was called Su Jinhua, she began slowly. She was born in the port city of Xiamen. She had a younger sister who emigrated to San Francisco in the year 1851 with her husband, a merchant. That younger sister had one daughter. That daughter grew up and married a man named Xiao, who brought her west. Mei Xiao's face went very still. Our grandmother, she whispered. Our grandmother was named Su. Su Jin Mei, Xiao Ren said from his chair, and his voice was thick with something that was not quite tears and not quite laughter. Her name was Su Jin Mei, my wife's mother. When I heard your father's name in the street last night, I remembered the stories my wife told me before she died. About a sister in Fuzhou who had married a physician. About the nieces she had never met. I did not dare to believe. I thought it was coincidence. I thought, who could believe such a thing? He was weeping openly, now the slow tears of an old dying man who has been given a gift he cannot quite accept. I told myself it could not possibly be. There are many families named Su. There are many physicians named Li. The world is large and full of names. The world is large, Mei-Lin said gently, but the circles inside it are small. Master Wu, our teacher, has walked a year to bring us this knowledge. It is true, Mei, you are our cousin. You are the only family we have on this side of the ocean. And your father, she turned to Xiao-Ren. Your father is the nearest thing we have to an uncle. Mei Xiao did not say anything. She simply reached out and drew Mei-Lin into her arms, and then reached for Xiu-Lan with her free hand, and the three of them wept together behind the counter of the general store, while Xiao-Ren watched from his chair and pressed his trembling hand against his mouth and tried to breathe around a feeling he had not felt since the day his wife had died. Outside on the porch of the Whitlock boarding house, Master Wu Jianping finished his tea and watched the clouds move slowly across the Arizona sky, and smiled a small patient smile, because some very long journeys he knew were about to find their way home. It was only later, much later, near sundown in fact, that Rance Dooley came hurrying up the main street with his scarred face tight with alarm, and delivered the news that a wounded man had been found half a day's ride east of Copper Hollow, bleeding out from what looked like a knife wound, and that the man was babbling in fever about a woman in silk and a debt that had to be paid, and that the man was against all expectation. Silas Granger, who had taken Ezra Cage's rifle, bullet in the shoulder blade, not the heart, and who had crawled into the alley and lain still until Thorne's gang had ridden out, and who had then stolen a horse and ridden east all night and most of the next day and most of the next 2 weeks, and who was now dying in the desert, and who was asking by name for the Zhao sisters. And Mei-Lin Zhao, standing beside her newly discovered cousin in the back room of a general store with her father's journal open on the table, closed her eyes and understood that her hunt was not quite finished after all, that there was one last conversation to be had, and that whatever she decided to do in that conversation would be the true closing of the circle, not the easy closing of a bullet from a stranger, but the harder closing of a choice made with her own hands and her own heart, and the full weight of everything she had learned in Copper Hollow pressing down upon her shoulders. "Bring me my horse," she said quietly. "Sister, Master Wu, Cousin Mei, I must ride out tonight, alone if you will permit it. There is something I need to finish, and I think I need to finish it the way I would have finished it 15 years ago, looking a dying man in the eyes." Xiu-Lan started to protest, and then, seeing her sister's face, did not. "Go," she said, "but come back, Mei-Lin. Come back to us. We have only just found out who we are." "I will come back," Mei-Lin said, and she went. The desert at night was a different country from the desert by day. The copper walls of the canyons turned black and silver under a fat October moon, and the small night creatures moved in the sage, and the air smelled of cold stone and dry grass, and the faint, sweet rot of things that had died and been forgotten. Mei-Lin Zhao rode east at a steady, unhurried pace, the journal wrapped in silk and tucked safely inside her saddlebag, a lantern hanging from her pommel unlit, because her eyes had adjusted to the moonlight, and she did not wish to announce herself to whatever was waiting. Rance Dooley's directions had been specific. Half a day's ride east, a dry wash where a stunted cottonwood grew out of the bank, a small dugout in the side of the wash where drifters sometimes took shelter from the wind. A man called Pritchard, riding night patrol on the east road for her, had found Silas Granger there at sundown, barely conscious and burning with fever, and had left his canteen and his jacket and ridden back to fetch help. Mei-Lin reached the dry wash a little after midnight. She tied her horse to the cottonwood and walked the last few paces to the dugout on foot. She did not draw her pistol. She did not bring a blade. She carried only a small leather satchel of herbs and clean cloth, the journal and silk, and a single tin cup. Silas Granger was lying on his side inside the dugout, half wrapped in Pritchard's jacket, his face slick with fever, sweat that glistened in the moonlight coming through the low opening. His eyes were open but unfocused. His breathing was shallow and wet. "Silas," Mei-Lin said quietly from the entrance. "It is Mei-Lin Zhao. Do you know me?" His eyes slowly focused. He drew a long, painful breath and tried to speak. On the second try, words came out. "You." "I came. Thought you'd let me die alone in the scent, like I left your folks." Mei-Lin did not answer. She crouched beside him, set down her satchel, and opened it. From it, she took a small pouch of crushed yarrow and poppy and a flask of clean water, and she began with the calm, practiced hands of a physician's daughter to examine his wound. The rifle bullet had entered his upper back near the shoulder blade and torn its way out through the front of his chest just below the collarbone. By rights, he should have died in the alley behind the iron spur. By rights, he should have died on horseback the first day. He had survived so long that Mei-Lin suspected there was something more than flesh keeping him alive, some unfinished thing, some last breath of conscience that would not let him go until he had said whatever it was he needed to say to her. "The wound is mortal," she said softly in English, so that he could understand. "I cannot save you, Silas. I am sorry. But I can ease the pain, and I can give you water, and I can listen to what you came to say." Came to say yes, came to say. He tried to push himself up on his elbow and failed. She helped him gently. His weight was almost nothing in her hands. Thorne had the book because I gave it to him night before. Told him take it. Said, if the women came trade me for it, save yourself. Mei-Lin went very still. "You told Thorne to trade you for the journal." Yes, he didn't believe me, laughed at me, said Caleb Thorne didn't trade his men. But in the morning I saw his face, I saw him take the book out. I knew he'd changed his mind. I knew it would work. "Why, Silas? Why what? Why did you give him the journal? Why did you ask to be traded? You have been running from us for 15 years. Why stop?" Silas Granger was silent for a long time. The moonlight came down through the low opening of the dugout and fell across his face and made his eyes look very far away. Couldn't run no more, couldn't. I was tired. I was so tired. His voice was barely above a whisper now. "I didn't set the fire. I swear to you, I didn't set the fire. Beckwith did that. Wadsworth told him to. I barred the cellar door. I did do that. I did do that. I told myself at the time it was because we needed the doors barred. But I knew. I knew what we were doing. I heard the little voices crying in the cellar before I slid the bolt. I heard them, Miss Zhao, little girls' voices. I told myself I didn't hear them, but I did. I have heard them every night for 15 years. Mei-Lin's hands were very still on the edge of his wound. "Why did you take the journal? Why not leave it for Wadsworth?" Because Wadsworth was going to sell it. And something in me, I thought if I took it, if I kept it, if I never sold it, then maybe one day I could give it back to someone, to anyone. I didn't know who. I didn't know you were alive. I thought maybe a museum, maybe a Chinese family somewhere. I didn't know. I couldn't let it be sold. Not after what we'd done to get it. That would have been the end of me. The last piece of the thing that could still be given back. He was weeping now, the slow, silent tears of a dying man. I kept it safe for 15 years. I never showed it to nobody. Thorne found out only a few weeks ago, searched my kit while I was drunk. He took it. He was going to sell it. That's when I knew I had to find a way to get it back to you, to someone like you. When you walked into the Iron Spur when I heard your names, I thought God himself had finally gotten tired of me running. I was ready. I was ready to die. I told Thorne to trade me. I tried to run at the end, not because I wanted to live. I ran because I saw him raise the match. I saw him about to burn it. I was going to try to knock it from his hand. Cade shot me before I reached him. Mei-Lin closed her eyes. For 15 years, she had carried a picture of Silas Granger in her mind, a faceless, cruel man, a brute who had barred a cellar door and set a fire and laughed about it afterward. That picture had sustained her through 10 years of training and 5 years of hunting. That picture had been the furnace in which her blade had been forged. The picture did not match the man dying in front of her. The picture had never matched him. The truth was smaller and sadder and more human than any furnace she had imagined. "Silas Granger," she said softly, "listen to me carefully. I am going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it because you will not have much time after I finish speaking. Yes, the journal is safe. My sister and I have it. We returned it to my father's line. We are using it to heal people in a town called Copper Hollow, the town where you came to, though you did not know that was where you were coming. A girl there, my cousin, is learning the formulas from it. An old dying man is breathing easier because of the recipes written in my father's hand in its margins. The book is doing the work my father and mother and their teachers meant it to do. You did not save it alone, but you kept it alive when it could have been destroyed or sold into silence. That is not nothing, Silas. That is a thing I did not expect to be able to say to you. Thank you. I am not finished. She reached into her satchel and drew out the small pouch of yarrow and poppy and began mixing it with water in the tin cup. I am not here to forgive you. I do not have that kind of forgiveness in me, and I do not believe such forgiveness belongs to me in the first place. It belongs to my father and to my mother, and they are not here to give it. What I have for you is something smaller, and I think it may be what you came to receive. Will you take it? Yes. Drink this. It will ease the pain, and it will bring you sleep, and from the sleep, you will not wake. It is a physician's kindness. My father taught me to give it only when nothing else could be done. I am giving it to you now freely without condition, because my father would have given it to any dying man who asked even a man who had wronged him. I cannot be the daughter of a hunter tonight, Silas. I must be the daughter of a physician. Will you accept the cup from my hand? He looked at her for a long moment. His eyes in the moonlight were clearer than they had been at any point since she arrived. Your father was a better man than I deserved to meet. Yes. Will you tell me their names? Your parents' names. I never let myself know them. I heard Wadsworth say the doctor and the doctor's wife, and I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. My father was Dr. Li Wenhao. My mother was Su Jianhua. They kept a garden with white jasmine by the gate. My mother sang when she worked in it. My father smoked a long bamboo pipe in the evenings and told us stories about emperors we thought were boring. They were very good to us, and we did not know how lucky we were. Li Wenhao. Silas closed his eyes. Su Jinhua. I will carry the names with me. I will tell them I am sorry when I see them. If you see them, Silas, I doubt they will have much to say to you. But you may tell them that their daughters have their journal back. You may tell them that. It may buy you a small moment of their attention. I will. He drank the cup. It took a long time, sip by sip, his hands shaking, and Mei-Lin helped him, holding the tin against his lips, the way her mother had held cups to the lips of dying patients in Fuzhou. When the cup was empty, she set it down and took his good hand in both of hers. I am going to sit here with you until you sleep, Silas. You will not be alone. Is there anything else you wish to say? Just one thing, the song I used to hum, the riverboat song. I didn't hum it when I barred the cellar door. I want you to know that. Your sister said I did. I didn't. I couldn't make a sound. My mouth was dry. I don't know why I'm telling you this. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything. But I wanted you to know I was quiet when I did it. I was ashamed even then. I was already ashamed. I hear you, Silas. Thank you. His breathing slowed, his grip on her hand loosened. The poppy was doing its work, and the long hemorrhage of 15 years of running was finally coming to its end. Mei-Lin sat beside him in the moonlit dugout and held his hand as his breath went shallower and shallower and eventually stopped. She sat a while longer after he was gone. There were no tears in her. There was no triumph either. There was only a kind of quiet, and beneath the quiet, a small, unfamiliar feeling she eventually recognized as peace. Not the peace of vengeance fulfilled, but the peace of a promise completed in a way her 8-year-old self in the cellar could never have imagined. At dawn, she dug a shallow grave in the soft sand of the dry wash by lantern light and by hand, and she rolled Silas Granger into it and covered him. She marked the grave with a single flat stone on which she scratched, with the point of her knife, the 2 Chinese characters for forgiven, by no one, and known by the daughters of Li Wenhao. Then she saddled her horse and rode west back toward Copper Hollow as the eastern sky turned from black to gray to the long pale rose of an Arizona morning. She reached the town a little after noon on the second day of riding. Xiu-Lan was waiting at the edge of the canyon road with Master Wu and Mei Xiao beside her, and when Mei-Lin dismounted, her sister said nothing at all but simply held her for a long moment, the way a sister holds a sister who has just come back from a place she had not been certain she would come back from. It is done, Mei-Lin said. He is dead. He is dead. I gave him the cup from our mother's recipes. I sat with him. He told me things I had not known. Some of them matter. Most of them do not. He is buried beneath a flat stone in a dry wash, and his name will not trouble either of us again. Xiu-Lan searched her face. And you all right? I am not all right, but I am all right enough. I will be all right the rest of the way, I think, with time, and with the help of the people who love me." Master Wu Jianping nodded slowly. "That he said in Mandarin is the most honest answer a warrior can ever give. Come, there is much to do today, and an old man would like to sit in a chair while you do it." The 30 days agreed upon with Caleb Thorne were drawing to their close. Hannah Whitlock's letters had borne fruit: 2 commissions from San Francisco and 1 from a Denver merchant house for authentication services, totaling $1,100 in gold, with half to be paid on delivery of certified translations and the balance upon receipt of the authenticated manuscript. Mei-Lin and Xiu-Lan, working together over the journal in the quiet evenings of the last week, had prepared the required translations with the care of daughters handling a relic, and Master Wu, who read classical Chinese, with the fluency of a scholar, had reviewed every word and affixed his own seal to the certification. On the 28th day, a private courier, hired through Hannah Whitlock's merchant contacts in Denver, at considerable expense, rode into Copper Hollow with a locked strongbox containing $1,100 in minted gold coin. On the 29th day, a different courier rode out of Copper Hollow, bound for the First Territorial Bank in Cheyenne, with 1,000 of those dollars and a simple note sealed with wax addressed to the attention of one Caleb Thorne. The remaining $100 went into a locked drawer beneath the counter of the Xiao General Store, designated as the seed fund of what Xiaoren Xiaoren in his last days of strength had insisted on calling the Lisu Free Clinic of Copper Hollow, to be operated by his daughter Mei and her visiting cousins for the benefit of any sick person in the town who could not pay. On the 30th day, Caleb Thorne's debt was settled, and an old dying merchant in a small adobe house in Copper Hollow closed his eyes for the last time, with his daughter holding his right hand and his cousin by marriage Mei-Lin Zhao holding his left. And the sound in the room as he passed was not weeping, but the quiet sound of 3 women speaking the old Chinese prayers for the dying that Mei-Lin had learned in her mother's garden in Fuzhou half a lifetime before. Xiaoren was buried in the small hillside cemetery at the north end of Copper Hollow, beneath a wooden marker carved with both his English name and the Chinese characters of his ancestors. Mei Xiao wept at the graveside for a long time, and then wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and said very clearly and very firmly, "Now we begin the work he bought for us." The work they discovered was not the work of a season. It was the work of a life. The Lisu Free Clinic opened its doors in the room that had once been the back storage space of the Xiao General Store, and for the first few weeks, it was run by all 4 of the Zhao Xiao women, Mei-Lin and Xiu-Lan, as the trained physicians, Mei Xiao as the apprentice and translator between the languages of the town, and Hannah Whitlock as the unofficial matriarch who had taken it upon herself to ensure that none of them forgot to eat or sleep. Master Wu Jianping watched from a chair in the corner and occasionally offered the kind of comment that caused everyone in the room to stop for a long moment and reconsider what they had been doing. By the end of the 2nd month, word of the clinic had spread to the mining camps up and down the canyon country, and patients were arriving from as far as a day's ride in every direction. By the end of the 3rd month, Reverend Hollister had returned with a wagon of donated linens and a short letter of endorsement from the Presbyterian Mission Board in Denver. By the end of the 6th month, a young Anglo doctor named Everett Hayes, who had read about the clinic in a San Francisco newspaper story written by a traveling journalist who had passed through Copper Hollow in November, had ridden down from Sacramento and asked with great humility if there might be a place for a conventionally trained physician to learn the old formulas from the daughters of Li Wenhao. There was. He stayed. The white jasmine seeds that had been given to Mei-Lin by the small boy in the final days at Copper Hollow, seeds that Mei Xiao's own mother had carried from Xiamen decades before, and had pressed into Hannah Whitlock's keeping with a whispered instruction that they were for the cousins who did not know they were cousins, yet were planted along the south wall of the clinic courtyard in the early spring of the following year. Mei-Lin tended them herself the way her mother had tended the jasmine by the gate of the house in Fuzhou, and they took root in the red Arizona soil with the stubborn resilience that jasmine had always shown when it found the right conditions. Caleb Thorne, as far as any of them ever knew, collected his $1,000 in Cheyenne and vanished into the territories beyond. Some years later, a traveler passing through the clinic reported a rumor of a former outlaw by the same name who had turned up in a mining town in the Dakotas, running a small freight company with surprising honesty, but the rumor was never confirmed, and the Zhao sisters did not ask. Whatever Caleb Thorne had become, he was no longer their concern. Their concern was the living and the sick, and the children being born in Copper Hollow, who would never know a time when the town had lived under the shadow of any tyrant. Ezra Cade was not so fortunate. He drifted south from Copper Hollow and fell in with a worse crowd than Thorne's had ever been, and was killed in a saloon gunfight in Tucson the following summer by a man whose name Mei-Lin never learned. Rance Dooley, to the quiet astonishment of everyone, including himself, stayed in Copper Hollow. He rode the patrol routes for the clinic's first year at $2 a day, and then when the clinic could no longer justify the expense of paid guards, he took a job at the livery shoeing horses and discovered at the age of 34 that he had hands that were good at careful work. He never married and he rarely spoke, and he came to the clinic every Sunday evening, throwing with a bundle of firewood cut to exact length for the stove, and he never once asked to be thanked. Master Wu Jianping remained in Copper Hollow for nearly a year. In the spring of that year, he quietly announced that he was ready to go home to his mountains, and he asked only for a horse and a few weeks of provisions. The sisters wept and argued and finally gave him what he asked for. The night before he left, he sat for a long time with Mei-Lin and Xiu-Lan in the courtyard of the clinic, beneath the stars, drinking tea and saying very little. At the end of the evening, he set down his cup and looked at them and said in the Mandarin of their childhood, "You came to me with fire in your hands, and I taught you how to hold a blade. You leave me in the end with medicine in your hands. I have been a teacher for 60 years, and I have never had two students do me prouder. Do not follow me. I walked a year to find you, and I wish to walk alone on the way back. Remember me in the jasmine." He rode out at dawn the next morning, his dusty gray robe and white beard catching the first light of the sun. The Zhao sisters watched him go from the porch of the clinic, standing very close together, their shoulders touching the way they had stood on the porch of the boarding house on that first October morning in 1879. Neither of them ever saw him again, and neither of them ever stopped hearing his voice in the evenings when they worked quietly by lamplight on the formulas from their father's journal. 5 years after the morning in the Iron Spur Saloon, the Lisu Free Clinic of Copper Hollow was known throughout the Arizona Territory and into New Mexico and Southern California as a place where the poor could be treated without fee, where the old Chinese medicine and the new American medicine were practiced side by side, and where the daughters of Dr. Li Wenhao and their cousin Mei Xiao had quietly built something that neither fire nor vengeance could ever again take from them. 10 years after the morning in the Iron Spur Saloon, Mei Xiao, now a qualified physician in her own right, trained both in the old formulas and in the new Western medicine. By Dr. Everett Hayes took over the primary management of the clinic, and Mei-Lin and Xiu-Lan Zhao turned their hands to teaching the next generation. Their students came from every corner of the frontier, Chinese, Mexican, Anglo-Apache, poor whites, from the mining camps, saloon girls seeking a new trade. The sisters taught them all with the same patient care their own mother had once used in a garden half a world away. 15 years after the morning in the Iron Spur Saloon, the same span of years that had once held only grief and hunting, the Zhao sisters stood in the courtyard of the clinic in the early morning of an October day and watched the white jasmine bloom. It was the third generation of the flowers from the seeds the small boy had given them, and the courtyard wall was completely covered in the small white stars of the blossoms, and the air was thick with the sweet, familiar scent of a garden they had not seen since they were 8 years old. Sister Mei-Lin said softly in Mandarin, "Do you remember the garden?" "Every day," Xiu-Lan said. "The white jasmine by the gate, mother's herb beds in their straight rows, father sitting on the stone steps with his bamboo pipe. We have made a new garden. We have made a new garden." They stood in the courtyard for a long time, saying nothing more, while behind them the clinic began to stir into its morning's work voices in the kitchen, the clink of metal instruments being laid out on clean cloths, Mei Xiao greeting the first patient of the day in 3 different languages. The sun climbed higher over the copper walls of the canyon, and the light fell into the courtyard, the color of a promise that had taken 15 years to keep, and had in the keeping of it been transformed into something neither sister could have imagined on the night they were trapped in a root cellar beneath a burning house in Fuzhou province. The fire that had taken everything from them had in the end forged something new. 2 weapons had become 2 healers. A vengeance had become a clinic. A cellar full of small crying voices had become a courtyard full of white jasmine and patient morning light. And the daughters of Dr. Li Wenhao and Su Jinhua had at last, after a very long journey, come home to the garden their mother had planted for them the day they were born. Not in Fuzhou, not in China, not in any place their parents had ever seen, but in a small, dusty town in the Arizona Territory, on the far edge of a continent their parents had never imagined, in the company of a cousin they had not known they had, and in the quiet, steady, entirely human work of choosing life one patient at a time every morning for the rest of the days they were given. Somewhere very far away, the ghosts of a physician and his wife looked down upon their daughters, and if the ghosts of the good dead are permitted any expression at all, smiled.